Good morning, everyone. Can we all find a seat so we can get going, please? Pretty please. So welcome to the College of the Atlantic, and this is the last coffee and conversation of the season, right? It's a bit of an odd one, not odd, no offense, odd. It's right, change of date on a Friday. It's kind of late in September. It's a panel, but it's been a really wonderful summer, and some of you, I can look out there and get the gold stars for being to every single one, which is amazing. Today, we're going to talk about food systems and food justice in the prison, and not just in Maine, but more globally. And I think what I took away from my initial reading of some of this is that when you pay attention to food and how you prepare it and feed people, it can build community and build individuals. When you don't do that, it can tear them apart. And that's what we're going to be really talking about today. And my role today is to introduce Courtney Cullum, and then Courtney will introduce our guests and be the moderator for the day. Courtney is a wonderful human being and on the faculty here at COA. She hails from Michigan, but did her PhD in environmental anthropology at the University of Maine, where she looked at blueberry farming communities and pollinators on Prince Edward Island and here in the state of Maine. She is currently the Partridge Chair in Food and Food Sustainability. And just a note, the Partridge Chair, the founder of that family Partridge is this woman, Polly Guth. And while Polly was living, we were never allowed to associate the two together, her and the Partridge Foundation, but she has passed and we can do this now. And so I keep this card on my desk because you're such a wonderful woman, and Courtney is Polly and Courtney would have the tightest relationship if possible, if she were alive. Courtney is just joined the academic deanship at the college, so I get the chance to spend a lot of time with her more recently. And food is such a core element to the college. I remember, and you probably do as well, during the pandemic when we had to effectively shut TAB down. We call TAB is take a break. That is where our dining hall. And when it was shut down, the place was just in chaos, again, demonstrating that eating and preparing food together is core to what makes a community. Even though she will not like that I say this, Courtney, in a sense, is like the hub of everything we do with food here. We have our farms, Beach Hill Farm, Peggy Rockefeller Farm, the community garden. We have TAB, which is where we consume food. And then we have the intellectual and academic piece of the puzzle. And Courtney, I really see it, she sits at the center of all that and is the glue that holds it together. So thank you for doing that, Courtney. And I'm gonna pass it on to you and introduce the panel. And thank you all for coming. Thanks, Courtney. Yeah.
Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Darren, thank you for that extremely generous and unnecessary introduction. Thank you all so much for being here for this last coffee and conversation. One of the pleasures of my job at College of the Atlantic is I get to speak to so many incredible people, and I can honestly say this is one of the highlights of my career. The three people sitting on this stage today are doing some of the most powerful work I've ever seen to transform food systems, and I think you're going to be blown away by the work that they're doing. We all came to know each other through a partnership between Impact Justice and Healthy Acadia that some of you may have known about. We had a beautiful fundraising dinner last night for the Down East Restorative Harvest Project, which you're going to hear more about. That's a new project of Healthy Acadia, a prison, a community garden that will feed the jail population and provide work for residents, and also get food into food pantries, and also a program of Impact Justice, the Chef in Prisons Project. So what we're gonna do is each speaker today, I will introduce them individually. So we have Regina Groberbach, Rebecca Mendy, and Leslie Sobel. I'll tell you a little bit more about each of them as they speak, and then they're gonna talk for about 10 minutes and tell you about the kinds of work they're doing. And then I'll follow up with a question or two, and we'll open it up to you all for questions. So we're gonna start with Leslie Sobel. Leslie is the manages the Food in Prison Project of Impact Justice. It's a nonprofit based in California that's working on prison reform. Leslie is also the co-author of this report that you see up on the screen, the lead author actually for Impact Justice. This is Eating Behind Bars, Ending the Hidden Punishment of Food in Prisons. And Leslie has really dedicated her life to this work and spent, I believe it was 5 years working to put this together. Okay, yeah, wonderful. So Leslie is going to tell you more about that work.
Thank you, Courtney. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So thank you. I'm Leslie Sobel. I work for Impact Justice. And our Food in Prison project began in 2018 as a national effort to call attention to the crisis of food in U.S. prisons and jails. And you'll hear in a few minutes from both Regina and Rebecca about really inspiring work that's being done around food in carceral facilities in Maine. And it's wonderful, it's really exciting to hear about. And I just want to emphasize that part of the reason that this work that they're doing is so inspiring and so special is because the picture in the rest of the country that isn't Maine looks really bleak. So Courtney has asked me to set the stage a little bit to talk about why we're talking about food injustice in prisons and jails, what the picture is, the big picture around the country. So for those of you who don't know, who aren't necessarily familiar with the carceral systems in this country, food in prison is an issue that affects everyone on a grand scale. There are about 2 million people who are currently incarcerated in the US in prisons, jails, juvenile detention centers, and other facilities of confinement. They eat 3 meals a day there. So when you think about even 10 million people entering local jails, that's local jails only each year, that's over 30 million meals being served in just jails alone. And even if this issue doesn't directly impact you, you probably know someone for whom it does, because 1 in 3 Americans has an immediate family member who has spent time in prison or jail. And there are over 5 million children who've had, under the age of 18, who've had a parent incarcerated. So just to give you a bit of a scope, and all of those people, 95% of people who are incarcerated eventually come home. So when you're thinking about the 2 million people who are currently inside, plus all the other people who have experienced incarceration, that's a pretty large number. So the purpose of the Food in Prison Project is really to amplify the voices of those who have been most impacted and to really connect people who are working on this issue, to bring folks into dialogue about the current approach to prison food and how it only really serves to bolster racist systems and to perpetuate harm. And our first effort, as Courtney said, was really to take a snapshot of the state of prison food nationwide, with a focus on adult facilities and state prison systems, because we had to narrow it down somewhere, although most people who've been in an adult prison have also spent time in a local jail. Many have also spent time in the federal system, and many of the people who are incarcerated today have also been incarcerated in youth facilities. So there's much overlap and much similarities, many patterns between the different kinds of facilities and the food that they served. So for the report that we published in 2020, we conducted a national assessment of prison food. We did surveys around the country with hundreds of people who have experienced incarceration. We did in-depth interviews with folks who've experienced incarceration and with loved ones of people who are currently incarcerated. We interviewed staff and leaders who are working in corrections around the country. We did site visits in several states, and we did a systematic review of food-related policies and procedures in all 50 state departments of correction. And we also spoke with dozens of people who are experts in nutrition, public health, medicine, psychology, prison law, as well as people who are working to change the experience of food in other institutional settings like schools, hospitals, and food assistance programs. So in the report, which we can certainly pass along the website for, you can Google it and find it, but we really talk about how the state of prison food has long-term and short-term impacts on people who are incarcerated, and those impacts ripple out to families, to communities, and to our society as a whole. And really looking at prisons as sites of food apartheid, and why the crisis of prison food can't be viewed in a vacuum, but it rather mirrors and is inseparable from food justice issues that are on the outside. So to go a little bit more in depth, just a few things that we learned during the course of this research. 94% of our respondents to our survey said that they were starving while they were in prison. They told us they didn't have enough food to feel full. And that's either because the portions are insufficient or because the food was simply too bad to eat. One person described it to us as just enough to keep you alive. Another interviewee who had a very powerful story told us that he was so desperate for food that he resorted to eating out of the garbage. And we heard about people who had been in solitary confinement who were eating toothpaste and toilet paper just to fill their stomachs. And that's from 2020, or that's from what we published in 2020, but I actually had an article come into my newsfeed just last week about people in Nevada who have been eating toothpaste tacos, where they've been just eating toothpaste just to put food into their stomachs. 3/4 of our survey respondents told us that they were served food that was spoiled or rotten while they were incarcerated. We heard about people finding cockroaches or pieces of metals in oatmeal. We heard about moldy bread, sour milk, rotten meat, and packaged products that were years past their expiration date. And we heard this from both formerly incarcerated individuals and from staff who work in the kitchens of those facilities. We also heard from numerous people who had worked in the kitchens that people are often required to cook and serve food that literally arrives marked not for human consumption. Someone once told us, the food there is designed to slowly break your body and mind. So my academic background is as a folklorist and ethnographer. I specialize in food and culture, with a particular focus on the way that we communicate through food. And we all do this, right? We all bring soup to a friend who is sick to say feel better. We use food to celebrate, to say I love you. And the food that is served in carceral facilities, on the other hand, is really designed to give the message that people who are incarcerated are not worthy of care and well-being. And the impacts of hearing that day after day, year after year, really can have a profound impact on people and how they see themselves, how they interact with others. And as all of you probably know, food isn't just about what is served in front of you, the actual food that you're eating, but also the environment in which you're eating it. So if you take a moment and think about a time when you've had a meal that's been in a great setting and you're with people that you really enjoy and there's good conversation, maybe you think about the ambiance of that meal, right? You can think about, how that makes you feel no matter what the food itself is, right? But then you think about the opposite experience of that. So eating environments in carceral facilities are a little bit different. They're often, if people are eating in a chow hall, it can be unpleasantly loud. Some places people are forbidden from talking, so it can be disturbingly quiet. The eating areas are often uncomfortably hot or cold. A lot of times they're really unsanitary, mold on the walls, insects buzzing around. And in a lot of places there are armed officers who are yelling at people to hurry up. People have to shove down their meal in about 5 to 10 minutes. Meals are often served at really unnatural times. So breakfast can be served as early as 3:30 or 4 in the morning. Dinner might be served at 4 p.m. and then there's a lot of time that elapses in between. So that can be really distressing to people's systems, to their bodies. And it's also just really degrading and disorienting. And there's also a growing body of research that shows that eating in a loud or stressful environment or not having access to natural light can actually really impact your metabolic health, which can lead to physical health issues. So many people who are in carceral facilities choose to forego the provided meals if they have the means to purchase from what is called the commissary or the canteen. That's a small store that's in the prison, and it's usually mostly junk food, usually ramen, chips, soda, things like that. And the prices are a lot higher in those commissaries than they are on the outside. Some folks are able to work while they're incarcerated, and they can, usually earn pennies on the hour to pay for those higher prices. But this is, it's a huge issue, and it actually contributes to food insecurity on the outside for families as well, because when families are having to put money on the books for people who are incarcerated and having to support their loved one on the inside, that means there's less money for food for the family on the outside. And folks can get really creative with commissary because as humans, we're very creative with food, right? We're very resourceful. So people make spreads, they eat together. There are people who, make cakes, birthday cakes, or soup out of all kinds of things because people still want to take care of each other through food. That need to connect through food, to connect to food, doesn't change just because someone is incarcerated. And I really, I really do want to call out that, it's the basic quality of food in many facility kitchens. There's a lack of sanitation, there's a lack of training. People who are incarcerated are 6 times as likely as the general population to suffer from foodborne illness. In terms of nutritional quality, the meals tend to be very high in sodium and sugar, very high in refined carbohydrates. So basically the diet that all of the professionals are telling us to avoid. And those diets can cause a lot of different health conditions like increase in body weight, increased inflammation, blood sugar issues that lead to things like diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension. And that kind of a diet can also weaken the immune system, leaving people susceptible to infectious disease like COVID. And it's not just physical illness, because missing critical nutrients in your diet can actually cause long-term mental health issues, anything from depression to impaired decision-making to more aggressive and hostile behavior. And we also know now that the human brain is still in active development until age 26. And when many folks who have become entangled in the criminal legal system before they're that age, then they're eating this food while their brain is still growing. So that's pretty terrifying to think. How am I doing on time? Maybe one more minute. Okay. So, there's a really strong relationship between food and trauma that we're learning about. There's, inherent trauma in the experience of incarceration, and people, are eating this food while that trauma is causing inflammation in their bodies, and it's causing folks to, to experience cravings for higher salt, higher sugar foods. It's causing folks to reach for food as an unhealthy coping mechanism, and that in turn has public health implications as well. And I do want to emphasize that it's critical to call out who is disproportionately impacted here. So across the country, folks of color are locked up at disproportionately higher rates than white people. People from low-income households are locked up at disproportionately higher rates than wealthier people. And it really mirrors that same issues of food insecurity on the outside. So people who are coming from these communities are thrust into a system that continues to replicate those patterns and then spits them back out into a system where they continue to lack access to regular healthy food. So again, you'll hear about some really, sorry to paint the bleak, depressing picture I've noticed watching people's faces, but I want people to understand the depth of this issue and why it's really, really important, the work that folks are doing here, the work that we're doing with our Chefs in Prisons initiative, putting a professional chef into the Maine Department of Corrections to help create recipes to help reduce tray waste so that food waste goes down, to really show people that food made with care and proper culinary training for people working in the kitchen can have a huge difference on people who are working in the facility. So I will end the super depressing part there and turn it over to a bit more of a hopeful turn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Leslie. And when Leslie and I were talking about what we wanted to focus on today, we discussed how important it is to set this national context. We're going to hear from the next 2 folks we're going to hear from are doing really incredible work in Maine to address these innate injustices in our food system, period, and in our carceral food systems. But we didn't want to just highlight this really incredible work. Maine is really at the forefront of some of this work, and we have some of the best examples in the country. That's one of the findings of Leslie's report, is that what we're doing here in Maine to change prison food systems should really be a model for the rest of the country. But we can't just look at those examples without understanding that that is not the norm, and it needs to become the norm. So Rebecca is going to talk to you about what she is doing. We have Rebecca Mende here. Rebecca is the vocational trades instructor in sustainability at Maine State Prison, the maximum security prison in Warren, Maine, where they run a 2-acre farm, actually engaging the men there in meaningful work to grow food that is being served in their dining halls, and I believe going into food pantries as well. And it's really a wonderful model for the country. So Rebecca, please tell us more about that.
So thank you.
I think you got to bring it a little closer.
A little closer.
There you go.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. So hi, thank you. So I'm going to try and take you on a virtual tour of what it's like to be at the Maine State Prison currently. So I began working there about 5 years ago. My background, previously I had a 1.5-year stint doing this work in a nonprofit setting in Portland, Oregon. And then prior to that, I was mired in academia. And so to kind of bolster what Leslie just said, as I was doing my research in both my undergrad and my master's program, this was the data that I was finding, was the statistics that Leslie was listing off, which paints a horrific picture of incarceration in America. And then I also want to just say that the contribution that Impact Justice has done as far as compiling that data and having an actual report that people can now go to kind of reinforce statements made and criticisms made about the state of incarceration is incredible. So anyways, I also want to say hello to some of the folks at Maine State Prison that are joining us today. During COVID, we started to get limited access to internet, and so I'm really excited that some of the men that work with me at Maine State Prison are joining us via online today. So at Maine State Prison, we are kind of an anomaly, or when you walk into our facility, you're at a maximum prison, but the first thing you see when you walk on the mile is rows of flowers. And I actually have some of the flowers today that came from the prison. We had some guests from the Posner Foundation join us on Wednesday, and one of the residents gave them a bouquet, and the bouquet made its way to Bar Harbor, and then here it is today. So probably 3 days ago, there was bumblebees and honeybees and Lord knows what else flittering on those. So you'll come into Maine State Prison and you'll see what we call the mile, which is kind of the walkway between all of the buildings. And it's filled with colorful pollinator flowers. And then just about every part of walkable land inside the inner perimeter of the prison has been worked and replaced with Swiss chard, tomatoes, peppers, carrots, turnips, whatever we can grow in our climate there at the facility. So we have about 2 acres that we farm inside of the facility. And when you think about farming a 2-acre farm, you probably consider what normally happens at a farm, that you wake when the sun comes up and you stop working pretty much when the sun goes down. You probably think of tools, you probably think of irrigation systems that are in place to kind of levy some of that physical labor. In a maximum security prison, we don't have those benefits. So all of the work, all of the water is done by hand. If we want to use a hose, that's considered a Class A tool, and so that requires security supervision. So they have to have somebody with them, myself or one of the staff that works with me, when they have hoses. Otherwise, they're carrying 30-pound watering cans to water 2 acres. We have 2 work periods throughout the day. So the guys get out at 8 o'clock for work and rec and 10:30 till 10:30, and then they have to go back inside for count, and then they're released again at about noon. Then they have chow, then they're back to work at 1 o'clock, and then 3:30 we wind up. So think about running a 2-acre farm, 5 hours a day, carrying watering cans. And so the fact that they're able to achieve what they have achieved is phenomenal. We also have some great programming. We do all of the education that coincides with the gardens. So prior to working in the gardens, I really encourage people to take the Master Gardener class. We've partnered with the Cooperative Extension, which has been a lifeline in providing curriculum and/or staff to come in and kind of supplement the things that I'm not comfortable in teaching. And so we have trained Master Gardeners, we have trained beekeepers, we have trained composters. And all of that helps to function keeping this farm going. Last year, let me see, I get my numbers so I can impress you. This year so far, we're on par. We've grown about 6,722 pounds of food. And of that, 1,500 pounds has been donated to the community. Since 2016, when this program was initiated at the behest of then Warden Liberty and now Commissioner Randy Liberty, we have grown 125,000 pounds of food, and we've donated 19,000 pounds of food back to the community. So that's no small drop in the bucket. That's a significant amount of food that has been produced by men that are literally getting paid pennies to do this work. And if it wasn't their dedication, I'm sorry, to come out every day. And when they started this program, the guys were coming out with mugs, and it was the plastic mug that they were issued to drink with, and that's what they were moving soil with. And so we have moved from plastic mugs to where we now have shovels, and these guys have an opportunity to come out, connect with the soil, get out of their minds, get out of the housing units, if they want to, it gives them an opportunity to feel like they're giving back to the community. Whatever they take from it, they have the opportunity now. They have some autonomy in a place that otherwise really segregates from autonomy. And it's not just because I know they're watching me and they're going to critique me when I see them on Monday. I know we can have all the vision in the world, but if we don't have the people that come and show up and do the work doesn't get done. So anyways, that's what we do at Maine State Prison. And then the hope is to use this as a model so that we can showcase to other DOCs across the country that if you think the work isn't achievable, I beg to differ. And every day when I show up, I know that this work is changing people's lives. I have men that send me letters if they're getting transferred or released that say, I couldn't have gotten through this bid if it wasn't having to the garden to come out and feel some normalcy or just kind of have an outlet for the stress. And then of course, we also have the benefit of we're providing food in the kitchen, right? And so when I say we've grown 125,000 pounds of food, that means nearly minus the donation has gone into the kitchen and has gotten on those trays. And so guys are telling me in the spring, when are we going to have cucumbers? When are we going to have peppers? We have a list now. If we don't have cucumbers by such and such date, I have some angry faces to answer to, and so no stress there. And so it's really incredible because this picture that Leslie has given you is 100% accurate. And so to be able to provide fresh salads, and we've been working really well with the kitchen, and I can't say enough to the kitchen staff that has been working with us and finding creative ways. When I first started at the prison 5 years ago, there was a lot of inexperience about what to do, and that's fair, what to do with garden produce. And so we would bring tomatoes in, and the tomatoes might get chopped in half and then just put on the tray. And so basically everything was just harvested, brought to the kitchen, maybe prepped a little bit and then put on the tray as a cold salad. Well, now we're having really creative uses with the vegetables. For instance, last year, remember we had that drought, and so for whatever reasons, tomatoes were really delayed last year. And so, about September is when the tomatoes started ripening, and then we got our first frost, and it was oh God, what do I do with all these green tomatoes? So in the kitchen manager was well, I can make a green tomato chili. And so we salvaged all of those tomatoes. They got fed to the population. And so by using that creativity in the kitchen, and also the Chef in Prisons program helps to bolster that, we're using all of that produce in a creative, mindful, thoughtful way. So people are looking forward to having, those items on their trays. And then we're also trying to incorporate some of the ideas of the population. The guys love pickles. If we're growing cucumbers, as nice as it is to have cucumber sandwiches, and I think all of us in the greenhouse have been eating cucumber sandwiches for about the past month, and we're okay with that. We sit out there with our packets of mayo and our slices of bread, and we just chuck up, and we're just all passing out, it's a thing. And so, the guys are we want more pickles. And so we bring in, and I see these lovely tomato and, crumbled cheese and onion salads on the trays now. And I think about what I read at other facilities and hear at other facilities where they're getting 2 cold bologna sandwiches a day. And I think, my God, we are so, so fortunate. But we don't need to be the only facility in America that is doing this. And so I'm really proud of the men that are maintaining the gardens at the prison, because this has given me an opportunity to come and share their story here locally, but then also hopefully further around the country, so that we can really start creating an impact in the carceral system in the United States. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And when Leslie and I were talking before the panel, we were talking about how, all of the terrible statistics that Leslie shared with you, it's not a coincidence, right? The prison food systems reflect our other food systems. They're embedded in multiple food systems that are inherently unjust. And so we not only need to be correcting what's going on inside prisons, but in our communities, the way we grow food and share food in general. And that's the kind of work that Regina does, that Regina is going to take us to next. So Regina is a lifelong farmer, homesteader. Regina, let me make sure I get this title right, is the Food Programs Manager at Healthy Acadia. She is managing programs all over Washington County, community gardens, the Gleaning Initiative, the Washington County Food Pantry Network, several community gardens. Like if there is something related to food in Washington County, Regina is connected to it in some way. And she is also helping with the on-the-ground work in Washington County, in Machias, to break ground on the Down East Restorative Harvest Community Garden, which is a partnership with Maine Department of Corrections and the Washington County Jail. And so she's going to talk a little bit about that work, but also just about connection to food in general, and how food is central to our humanity, and celebrating that and empowering that for all people, how critical that is to welcome people when they come back into our communities, to help people have meaningful work and connection to the land. So please tell us a bit about that, Regina.
Can you hear me? All right. Thank you. Courtney, that was a beautiful introduction. Thank you. And I'm so honored to be on this panel with both of you, incredible workers who've been doing this work and have been on the ground. I see you both as my mentors, and I'm looking forward to years of work with you on this work. This is quite a dream come true for me in many ways. I will be sharing about Healthy Acadia's vision for our Down East Restorative Harvest Program, which has only just begun. First, I want to offer some thanks here, because we would not be doing this work without the incredible partnerships that we have, not only the vision of Healthy Acadia, the organization that I work for, to be able to embark on this work, but also the Maine Department of Corrections, with whom Leslie certainly works, Rebecca works with, Commissioner Randall Liberty and his incredible support for this work, and food service manager at Mountain View Correctional Facility, Mark McBride, for his Herculean efforts to get our ground ready for the 2024 growing season. He has literally spent probably close to 100 hours already on our ground, preparing it. I also want to thank the Washington County Commissioners, Sheriff Barry Curtis and Jail Administrator Rich Rolfe, for their support and faith in our work. I'd like to start by sharing a personal story. This summer, I had the privilege of traveling to my grandfather's homeland, Croatia. I backpacked over mountains, through woods, across valleys, across fields, through villages. I met the people. I visited with my family there. I smiled, seeing the many large backyard gardens filled with potatoes, cabbages, and onions, chickens running along dirt roads, and sheep grazing across fields. It was immensely satisfying to feel my feet on the ground that my grandfather grew up on, to see the views that he might have seen when he was a child, and to contemplate what it might have meant for him to leave his beautiful country to travel to the United States as a teenager. Once back home, I picked up a book that I had been reading before I left, Fred Weissman's Seven Sisters. I highly recommend it. It was given to me by Brian Altivator, a Passamaquoddy elder. Weissman is an ethnobotanist in northern Vermont who's been studying about the foods, traditional indigenous foods of the Abenaki and Wabanaki peoples. Weissman has made strong and powerful arguments and observations about the importance of indigenous food systems and their corresponding belief systems, and how the health of both systems impacts individuals and community. Nutritionally, culturally appropriate food is a basic human right. Connection to land is fundamental to the health of our people and to community. Together, my travels and my readings were bringing together and deepening a belief that I've held all my life about the importance and why I'm passionate about growing food. Recognizing our intrinsic connection to nature through gardening activities can be a vital first step in building community, which is so necessary for the health of any individual. So first, that connection is your connection to nature. And then that builds a sense of connection to community around us and to local communities. I see this as the foundation of the work that we are hoping to do and planning to do with the Down East Restorative Harvest Program to create community gardens that feed people. Now, all aspects of this carceral food justice work, as you've seen here, getting fresh food into the prisons and jails, how that food is prepared and served in those settings, how we treat prison and jail residents, providing educational and job opportunities, and examining our cultural biases about people who are impacted by those systems and those who are employed by them. All of this woven together will support reduced recidivism rates and better outcomes with prison sentences. We must address all aspects of prison and jail reform in order to alleviate this complex issue. I believe, and I know everyone on this panel believes, that gardening and harvesting good food for the jails is a piece of a larger systemic solution. Healthy Acadia is grateful to have secured a 10-year lease with the County of Washington for our program. In the 2024 growing season, we anticipate planting our first quarter-acre section, building a barn structure, putting up a greenhouse. We'll continue to grow with the hiring of a garden coordinator, and will ultimately increase production up to 2 acres. I'm aspiring. I can do it. With the harvest being distributed to the Washington County Jail and local food pantries. Eventually, there will be space for community members to have plots, for an orchard, for beekeeping and other agricultural endeavors. This winter, we'll be working on exploring core educational programming and the support and guidance, and with the support and guidance of local officials and the Maine Department of Corrections and their culinary and horticulture reentry apprenticeship program. And we've had initial conversations with the jail program coordinator in Washington County and with staff at the Washington County Community College about the excellent programming that they have available for jail residents. We will continue to research locally available programming such as the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, their Master Gardening Program, and others. And all programming will support jail residents in their successful re-entry into their and our communities. Through all of our efforts, we will work closely with our neighbors in the Passamaquoddy and Latinx communities to ensure that the programming that we support addresses their needs, such as having culturally appropriate foods and religious ceremonies for incarcerated tribal members. Growing food can support us in our healing process at the same time that it provides nutrition and exercise for our bodies. I grow food because it feeds my heart as well as my belly. The food that I grow, the food that I gather from the wild, connects me to nature, to my Croatian and Quebecois ancestors, and to this Wabanaki ground that I work and reside on. It is my hope that the Down East Restorative Harvest Program will physically and spiritually nourish and help to begin the healing journey for some of those who are currently incarcerated and who are seeking a way to reestablish life outside of prison walls. Remember, most people who are impacted by the carceral system will be living in our communities again, as we've pointed out. It is up to us to give them a chance to belong to a community by giving them the tools to lead a healthy life and skills to find employment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Regina, and to all three of you. We have about 15, 20 minutes left. So I'm going to pose a question and then I will open it up to the audience. I'm sure you all have questions for this group of folks we have up here right now. So One thing you all touched on to a degree is the desire to set people up for meaningful lives after incarceration. And we've talked a lot about improving the quality of food, connection to food, to meaningful work inside of jails and prisons. But I know everyone on this panel is interested in the number one goal is reduce the size of the prison population and create a pathway for people who, our friends, our neighbors, as you said, our family, to be able to come back after prison and have belonging and build connection in their community. And I know we share this belief that food can be a central part of that. So this is the question I have for you all, and you can all speak to it, or if a few of you would like, but I'm wondering, what have you learned in your work about setting people up for meaningful lives after incarceration?
Okay. So I have a lot of thoughts that run through my head, probably too many. And one of the things that has been stuck lately is this idea of, like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it really make a sound? And so if we have this work being done inside a prison, which is created to be separated from the community, so a lot of people don't know what goes on inside in prison, and that's part of my job now, is to try and tell that story. If no one knows what's going on inside, and then these guys return to the streets, but no one knows what they've been accomplishing inside the prison, what value did any of that training achieve? And so I think about what the men do and what we're learning together. I have learned so much as a grower myself, working with these men for the past 5 years. And so, I guess the term now is regenerative. We're practicing regenerative farming as much as we can, feeding the soil as much as we can, limiting the destruction of the soil as much as we can. There's a lot of scheduling, there's a lot of crop knowledge, there's a lot of just like basic botanical knowledge that goes into growing a 2-acre, ornamental and edible farm. And so if the men are excelling in those skills, but nobody on the outside knows, how does that translate? And so what we're working on this year is we got ourselves a booth at the Common Ground. And so I'm really excited I'm really excited to give some visibility to what they're doing so that we can hopefully connect them with the farming community, with the processing community, whatever avenue the men want to pursue. Some people want to pursue more of like a leadership, like a nonprofit type role, and some people want to just continue growing, and some people want to, do the processing and like jams and jellies. And so that's what we're trying to do right now in that vein, is to try and create a visibility so that people are seeing that these guys are actually skilled and trained and able to go and do jobs on the streets that requires somebody with 2-3 years experience, and they have actually demonstrated that during their time at the prison. So that's what we're hoping to try and link there.
Piggybacking off of what you said, Rebecca, about people don't know what's going on inside of a prison. I think a lot of times people kind of forget that prisons and jails are there, right? They're meant to be this space that's very separate from the community. But everyone who's interested in food knows that food systems are very integrated, and it's not possible to separate various parts of the food system or the way that a food system works in a community, just like it's not actually possible to separate the people who are in a prison from the rest of the community. They're still there, even if people aren't looking, right? They're still there. They're still participating in food systems, right? Like the prison in most places the prison system is the largest purchaser of food, or the jail system is the largest purchaser of food in a county or a state. And I think it's really important to call attention to that and use food as a means of reminding people that folks who are incarcerated are still part of families, they are still part of our communities. And food is this very humanizing way of doing that, right? And so Maine is actually doing a really good job of this. We were able to do a presentation at the Maine Food Convergence Conference a few months ago. So it was all people working in food system stuff in Maine. And we had a really great panel with our Chefs in Prisons program chef and the director of food and culinary at the Maine Department of Corrections, and Rebecca's garden crew leader joined us as well and was able to talk about that program, and Mark McBride was able to join us for that as well. And just really reminding people that, people are, especially here, growing food on the inside. They're eating food on the inside. Those facilities are purchasing from small farmers, from local distributors, and really engaging in that food system. And so making sure that people who are incarcerated are not only learning skills that they can then use individually, but really understanding that those people are part of our communities. They're still part of our communities, even when they're on the inside. And that these institutions are, temporary spaces where people are living, or for some people, permanent spaces where they'll be for the rest of their lives. But at the same time, it's so important to remember that the people inside are still participants in that community food system.
One thing I would also like to add for those of us who are not so familiar with the carceral system, and something that even I have been unfamiliar with previously, is that both Leslie and Rebecca are working in prisons. Those are run by the state. Our program is going to be working with the jail in Washington County, and that's a very different system. We don't know all the parameters of how that works. And I would actually dare say that in some ways, the jail system is even more invisible. It's run by the county. There's far less funding in most cases, as far as I know. So it's going to be an interesting process, but we have very willing partners in Washington County, and we're really excited to embark on that work.
Thank you. We'll open it up now to questions from the audience. And Sean has a mic.
Yeah, and I'll just ask folks to speak right into the mic so that those who are listening online can hear you.
First, I want to thank you for what you do, and thank you for coming here to share it with us. I don't think anyone has spoken to the numbers, and I have a feeling that providing your own food through farming is really beneficial financially, and what type of impact that has made in a political sense. And I have another question, if I can ask too. I know some of the prisons, I don't think in Maine, are outsourced. And I was wondering if you've had any interaction with that mindset and structure in changing the way they think about food.
That's a tricky one to answer. I would love to say that we're saving money by growing our own food. Unfortunately, there's a reason why food is grown on an industrial scale. It is not necessarily cost effective at this time to be growing our own food. But I will tell you what, if you want to look at like cost savings analysis, you can spend X amount of dollars growing food and providing a program for individuals to participate in, or you can spend X amount of dollars dealing with the consequences of not offering any sort of programming inside of a prison and having people with zero to do, with stuck in their minds, and all of the stress and anxiety and behavior that comes out from that. So at this point, if I'm saying it correctly, I don't want to give the impression that we're saving dollars by growing our own food. I'm pretty sure every year I spend more than I'm actually bringing in when I sell the food back to the kitchen. But I think about it in life and what we're saving for these individuals by giving them an opportunity to learn and get some pride and then confidence in themselves. And that's where the cost savings, I would say, comes in.
And the health impacts.
And the health impacts, yeah.
I can take the question about the outsourcing. In Maine, all of the food service is run in-house within the department. We have, in other places in the country, engaged with prisons and jails that outsource their food service to companies like Aramark or Trinity, so private providers who come in. The food tends to be significantly worse in places that have private providers because those are companies where their goal is the bottom line, and their goal is not necessarily to provide people with nourishing food. It is to get food out on trays and try to make a profit. So that is the case in many places around the country. Sometimes there are whole systems that outsource their food. There are also, I'm not sure if your question was about private food companies doing food service or about like private prisons in general. Private prisons, yeah. So only about 9% of the people in this country who are incarcerated are held in private prisons. So people often look to private prisons as the problem. They're not necessarily the whole problem. But you know, the food often we've heard tends to be worse again in the private prisons because they're run by corporations who have a different mindset around this.
Right, over here.
Hi, thanks so much for all the work you do. It's so important to connect us back to other populations. I had, I guess you answered the question about going to the Common Ground Fair. That was my question about whether you're connected with MOFCA, but I was specifically wondering about the apprentice program, because I think there's people there that might be willing and have the skills and interest in doing the gardening and doing the urban type gardening, and they have a need for apprentices to go to land. Find land to learn their trades there. And the other thing is, because of MOFCA, I'm aware that organic farming, organic gardening is the fastest growing part of agriculture right now. So I think the skills that you're teaching in a low impact regenerative way is going to be very useful for the people who are re-entering the community, because they'll have really marketable skills. And I wanted to ask a question whether you're experimenting with any small scale aquaponics. So instead of these huge, like Nordic or the thing they want to do out here with salmon in cages, doing a small scale like tilapia with, like in a swimming pool, like a little kiddie pool with plants growing above it. There's some small scale things I was just reading about in Brooklyn and in New Jersey that they're doing this in an urban scale that can give you a protein as well as an animal protein, as well as it takes the waste out of that stream.
Thank you. Do any of you feel like you could address those questions?
So, two-part question there. First part is we are connected with MOFCA, thankfully. Someone just told me last night about the MOFCA apprenticeship, and I'm not fully aware of that one yet or what that apprenticeship requires, but I work pretty closely with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and they have offered to us, they have a horticultural apprenticeship. And so I actually, myself and two of the residents are online to start, I think in October that program starts, and it's a 1.5 years. So we're actually going to kind of audit that program and see how that fits in our setting, because my guys can't leave the facility. So I don't know with the MOFCA setting if they would, I don't know how that would translate. But we're online to start, it's actually pretty cool. We're going to start this horticultural apprenticeship through Cooperative Extension, and I think October that starts, and that's like a 1.5 year commitment.
Yeah, I meant the MOFCA apprentices to come to prison.
Oh, yeah, that's a potential thing that I could discuss. And when I'm at Common Ground, obviously I'll be able to have those conversations in person a little bit more, but thank you. And then your second question was aquaponics. And I'm sure they're chuckling right now at the prison. There's been a lot of discussion about aquaponics. And my answer to that is we need to successfully grow vegetables in the soil first before we start broadening. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. I'm like, let's just have a season where we're not having collapse everywhere, and then we'll move on. So that's where we're at right now. And the guys do phenomenal. I'm not saying we're a hot mess in there, but still one thing at a time. And so, yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, for sure.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for this. I feel like I've already learned so much from you guys and the time that you've spent taking to speak with all of us today. So I'm a student here at COA. I actually just transferred in, so this is my first week here, ditching a little bit of orientation because I wanted to hear y'all speak. But yeah, I think my question is kind of how could students here get involved with the work that y'all are doing? How can we support? Because I know that there's a lot of people, myself included, who would be very interested in kind of finding ways to contribute.
I'd certainly be happy to take that on, being that COA is only 2 hours away from Washington County in Machias. We'd be open to exploring any sort of possibilities that could work for COA. Actually, in this past spring semester, I actually did a presentation at Suzanne Morse's, is that Suzanne? Suzanne Morse's class, to see if in her class there were students that might be interested in helping us to design the garden space in Machias. I assume that nobody took up on that offer, but I did do a presentation, so I'm open to all opportunities. I know Healthy Acadia would be. We'd be open to having people come and work, do some work stints, or be involved in research or surveying in any capacity. I don't know if anybody else, I mean, there's lots of other options, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I talk a lot, but that's one of the big things on my mind a lot, is that there are those of us that are doing this work, but we're in limited numbers. And if this work is going to grow, it's really going to require the participation of up and coming, agrarians or academics. And so there is room for all of you. And last year, I had the incredible opportunity of, there was a young woman that was finishing up her undergrad at University of Oregon, and she was trying to get into a DOC because she had been inspired about prison gardens, and Maine DOC was welcoming to her. And so I had an intern, we called her Kate the Great. And she is. And she came and worked with us for about a month and a half at the facility, and then returned to Oregon. And now she's actually working at the nonprofit that I used to work for out in Oregon. And so I'm like, yes, we got one more person in. So please, I mean, this is definitely something that needs to be explored for those of you that are younger or even older and entering this work, because for this movement to grow and expand, it really requires more people coming in and being willing to take on the challenge. And so please, like, if this is something that you want to further explore, you can reach out to any of us. There's multiple ways. You can do it inside of a prison. You can do it research based. You can do it from a health perspective. There's room for you. So yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I know we've thrown out a lot of data and information at everyone today, but there is so much that hasn't been looked at yet. There's so much that we haven't had, because as Rebecca said, like there is a very small network of people working in food and carceral facility issues around the country. We kind of all know each other. And we need more people to look at different aspects of this work, looking at it from public health, looking at it from human rights, looking at it from environmental sustainability. And the more folks we have calling attention to this issue, the more students who are doing research or joining up with an organization to come work on the ground, the better. We need to make noise around this issue to actually make change.
Thank you all so much. And I will just plug, College of the Atlantic is super excited to work with Healthy Acadia to fundraise for interns to work on the Down East Restorative Harvest Project. And last night, Leslie and Rebecca and I were chatting about the possibility of getting these amazing folks here to teach visiting classes. And Rebecca in particular was saying, like, we need more people doing this work. We need to train them. And who better to train them but Rebecca? So hopefully we can make that happen. Please support this work if you are interested. There's a table at the back with more information. There's actually a garden party happening tomorrow. Yeah, can you tell us about that, Regina?
We are having our first open house, basically, on our land on Broadway in Machias. Tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock, we're starting. I'll go till about 7:30. We have music, and wonderful music, Washington County based. We have food that will be free of charge. So please come see the land, come see the work that Mark has accomplished over the last several weeks, and what we plan to do. It's a beautiful field, and it's a beautiful drive up to Washington County.
Well, please join me in thanking our three panelists.
So I've never measured the decibel level of the applause, but that could be record applause there, I will say. And this is the kind of stuff I think that in Maine we can be super proud of, unlike the embarrassing nature of the way the state of Maine approaches sovereignty and self-determination with the Wabanaki tribes, which is a real mark of embarrassment of the state. So as we leave, definitely, like Courtney said, support the work of these projects. Amazing. Getting students, it's so cool that you skipped out on it and came here. That's the best. That was the best. No, I won't tell anyone. But also think about ways of engaging with the Abbey Museum and the Wabanaki Alliance on this question of sovereignty. And one just little last anecdote that's not really related, but during the COVID pandemic, in the fall of 2021, we wanted to get all of our students back on campus teaching and studying in person. And so we tried to get as many courses outside that fall as possible. And Courtney taught Bees and Society, I think that, and she taught it, I think, to 1/3 of the entire student population of the College of the Atlantic, which I just think really is a testament to her work, but how engaged we are with the food system. So thank all of you, and thanks to all of you for coming, and I hope you had a wonderful coffee and conversation season. Yeah.